Hey fellow fraud fighters, I'm Jimmy Fong, CCO at SEON, and welcome to the Cat and Mouse podcast. SEON is fortunate to work with businesses such as the likes of Revolut, Nubank and Patreon in the fight against fraud. But with this podcast, we want to provide a comfortable space for people to talk about the daily challenges, topics on the horizon, and ultimately give us all a better insight into the mindset of fraudsters. And with that, on with the show. So Steve Moffat, massive thanks for coming into our Soho spot here. I really appreciate it. Yeah, great to have you. And we were just talking before, like, what an incredibly varied and experienced history you had, right? Previous. So I guess if I was to recap it, over a decade over at Betfair, kind of learning the payments and kind of fraud space all the way from ops level, and then of course kind of helping with more responsibility in teams as you kind of grew there. Through to different adventures over at we've got everything from Spotify, being first kind of like member in the ground out of London as well, 11FS experience, and then over with the MRC of course, and being part of that European board as well. To the team over at 3 on telcos, WorldRemit, and then where you are today at Phorest. Amazing background.
I mean, if I was a footballer, you'd definitely think, right, he's a good functional player who's been at a few clubs and can do some kind of job. Yeah, it's been just under 15 years in the payment space. I started many moons ago in 2007. I won't give you the whole history, but I think it's quite interesting at the start of the career, because I didn't know I'd end up in the payment space. I didn't know I'd be looking after payments and risk teams. And I think it's hopefully instructive for anyone thinking about a career in the space as to how you can just kind of jump in and get your hands dirty. So I came back from travel. I was living in New Zealand and Australia. Came back from travel to Ireland in 2007, which was not the most salubrious time to come to Ireland. I remember it was raining. Nobody had a job. Everyone was shaking me by the lapel saying, why have you come back to this country? We're completely in the shit. And one of the companies that was hiring was Paddy Power in gambling. So they're somewhat recession proof in that space. So I started in Paddy Power in 2007, working at night, speaking to poker players about not sober poker players about their bad beats. Which was, instructive, and kind of you learn at the coalface in the industry. The payments team was just being started up in Paddy Power, so within a couple of months, I'd moved over as a kind of junior BA on payments. I'd previously been working in the banking space as well, so I knew the payment space pretty well. And it just went from there. So kind of became a product owner for Pay at Paddy's, shifted over in 2014 to become the second in command to the head of payments at Betfair. He then left, so I became the head of payments and fraud at Betfair, looking after
brewery, just off the top of my head.
Brewery? There was a brewery there. No, so the guy I worked with was an esteemed gentleman called Phil Rivers, who is one of the most universally liked people in the space. I can't find anyone who can say a bad word about him, which is, I don't think, all that common in our space. Then the companies merged and operations were being moved, so I moved to Spotify, then on afterward to 11FS, as you mentioned, which was great, super team there. Did a while at 3 UK, which was, kind of after looking after, global payments, multi-wallets, etc., to just laser focus on the UK and just a couple of pay methods was really interesting as well. And then to WorldRemit for 2 years, looking after teams sending money around the world. 90% going within a half hour. So from a fraud screening perspective, that is a pretty squeaky bum experience.
That's crazy, yeah. Because we were talking about it, like in the kind of pre-chat before, like that WorldRemit experience of like balancing speed, because surely that is the reason why people sign up to that service in the first place, versus say the balance of security. But like you said, you've got to do it in like fractions of a.
You've only got you've only got seconds on some transactions, and you're talking about from a risk perspective, you're talking about somebody coming from West Africa to the UK, They come to improve their lives and to send money home as well, which is amazing. And WorldRemit are, helping people to do that, which is life changing. But you're trying within that, really short period of time to validate the person's identification, make sure you're comfortable with their payment from a KYC perspective, from a compliance perspective, and then from an overall risk appetite perspective for fraud, and then to successfully get that money distributed to the person who needs it most. It's a responsibility. I described it. We were saying earlier as well. I described it yesterday as if I was to sum up the function of a fraud team in an analogy, you've got 100 people who are trying to get into a football ground. You've got one person within that group of 100 that you don't want to let in, but you also don't want to piss off the 99 others. So the question is, how do you find that guy while still allowing people to feel like they've got this seamless experience? Because from a WorldRemit or remittance perspective in general, everyone wants their payment, you're right, to be low cost, fast, and secure. But I want my payment to be secure. I don't mind if, you know what I mean? I don't mind if everyone else's payment takes really long or is less secure, but my money has to go successfully. So stepping back and looking at those payments from a meta perspective, it really comes down to, can we get at the data points that we need in as real-time methodology as possible to get to a really high degree of confidence that the money we're accepting and then passing out is money we're comfortable using, and we've a high degree of confidence that we're not going to see a chargeback.
And in that skinny margin business, like that ability to be successful at picking out that one person in that 100 crowd, right, is the lifeblood of the business.
100%. Yeah. I mean, so the logical steps that you go through will be, well, let's just send everything. And then you get hit by fraud. Mm-hmm. And then it's like somebody's broken up with you in a bad way. You're like, well, I'll never be hurt again. I'll protect myself. But then you start to lower the authorization rate, and you're taking in less transactions. So then you've got a marketing team coming to you saying, what the fuck are you doing? We just spent, our cost to acquire this customer was $35 and you've declined their first transaction. Why have you done this? So then you begin to move into kind of the second state after that first fraud hit. You move into that second state of, okay, well, we can get more granular on this and we can try to understand a little better whose money you're comfortable taking. But we probably need a manual review team. And then you realize, well, now your cost to acquire that customer is not just the marketing spend or the PPC or whatever it was. It's now also 20% of your transactions are going to a manual review team, and that person sitting there looking at that transaction costs money. So then you try to squeeze that down to, let's get that 20% down to 18%. Let's get that 18 down to 14. And then the only way to do that without exposing yourself to more risk is to get better at making automated decisions faster. So it's really funny. I've worked in disparate industries, but the fundamentals of the making the decision on the transaction from a fraud perspective, they never change. It's just about, can I accurately identify, number one, reduce false positives, and number two, reduce our false negatives. So I'm not pissing off people who should validly send money, but I'm also making it as inconvenient as possible for a fraudster to use our platform in the way that they want.
Yeah, that last sentence is quite key. You're trying to make the bar is high enough in the organization you're with that there's other opportunities from their point of view that they can probably go to some extent.
I worked with a gentleman who had been in the fraud and compliance space in banking for 20, 25 years. Mm. And his analogy was always, you don't need to be 100% secure. You just need to be more secure than the guy down the road. So it's the analogy of the, if we're both running from a tiger, I don't need to be faster than the tiger. I just need to be faster than you, unfortunately, right? So, and that's definitely the case. So whether we're, to think of remittance companies in general, I know that there are fraudsters who are testing, WorldRemit, they're testing Wise, they're testing, any number, Western Union, any number of companies. They're repeatedly testing, and what they're looking for is that little gap where they can focus and say, right, these guys have set up their fraud rules. For example, These guys have a 24/7 fraud team, and these guys have they've got a 12-hour team, and they go to skeleton crew afterward, right? So they can only manually review X number of transactions during this time period. So we get our fraudsters are willing to work late nights and early mornings,
or they're only working those optimized shifts because they know where
they don't need to. Yeah. But they'll pen test on those lower cards, lower value cards, find the times when the transactions are more likely to get through, and that's when you get hit. I mean, without going into too much detail, I've had a really significant fraud attack, which hurts. It both hurts in terms of your workload increases. Your stress level increases, your team's stress level increases, and you're scrabbling around to make sure that you're minimizing those fraud losses. You're both blocking the door and keeping your Exco team completely up to date on what's happening. So it hurts in terms of stress, but it also personally hurts because sometimes in fraud screening you really feel like you're successfully blocking fraudsters, and you feel like you're as in control as if you were playing a chess game, and right, I've got this guy, this is fine. And other times, it does not feel like a chess game. It feels like you're in a wind tunnel trying to pick things up, and everything's just flying at you and hitting you.
And that bit you were saying, Steve, around kind of like the stresses, I guess this is kind of that pre-chat you're talking about, like even a little bit of what it felt like to be under a live fraud attack.
It's an awful experience. The reason I brought up the attack was there was no question they knew our fallow times in that fraud attack, and I kind of afterward when I sat back, I kind of admired what they did as well. There's part if you work in fraud and you've not left your company exposed to something stupid, and a group of fraudsters have been quite clever in what they've done, you do kind of sit back and go, well played. I wish that they would direct their attentions to other industries, but there is something where you step back and you go, okay, that was organized, that was intentional. You've moved the money well into instruments that I can't really pull it back from, etc. So, but yeah, that feeling when you're under a fraud attack, because I think there are two polar opposites of feelings in fraud. There's one where you are absolutely in control. You're walking in every morning to a report from your team to say, we blocked this amount of transactions. We have this high degree of confidence that these are not false positives, or indeed more troubling false negatives. And here's your basis points of chargeback losses over your total volume, and it's within the accepted range. There's that calm, kind of almost BAU feeling, and then you're hit on a fraud attack. It is a polar opposite feeling. It is a feeling of a loss of control, that potentially the losses could be, you can't even quantify them. It could be anything, right, at that time. And until you work out the modus operandi, there is this feeling of, well, like I'm being attacked and I can't even really explain how. So that feeling, which I think all fraud managers have had at some point, is what we're trying to avoid. What we're trying to have is a position where you will get some fraud losses through because you have a risk appetite, which is X. You stay within that risk appetite, and if anything, you outperform it and kind of incrementally improve over time.
Any practical tips on how to manage expectations from, say, management and the board? Because I guess that is the most base human fear, right? When you've just got big question marks over a lack of control and visibility to liability and loss at that stage. Any practical tips? Because that's what I guess our fraud managers are trying to provide.
So I think the age-old, as long as I've been speaking to people about fraud at conferences, whether it's MRC or which is excellent, and I advise everyone to join the MRC because nothing will hockey stick your knowledge of the fraud and payment space more than speaking to professionals who know the space. But yeah, the age-old problem in fraud is that nobody wants to. Understandably, businesses don't want to throw money at fraud prevention because why do that when I can spend another 200k on marketing and I can get more customers? I need customers now. Customers and revenue, margin, growth are the oxygen of companies that are attempting to grow, and doing things like to a lesser extent compliance stuff, which is kind of binary and it has to be done. But from a fraud perspective, if I say to you, you're my CEO, and I say to you, look, our fraud losses right now, we're at 9 to 12 basis points of chargeback losses right now. However, my concern is I don't have the tools right now to be able to keep those losses within those levels. Right now, we're being lucky. People are not focused on us from a fraud perspective. But as we grow, once we're in the news, yeah, it's great for investors. It's also, fraudsters will take a look. And I don't have the tools to defend us from those losses. So right now, it could be anything from 500k to 1.2 million of a fraud loss hit. The problem you'll have is until people lose that 500k to 1.2 million or whatever number, it is very difficult to get traction for new fraud screening development. Companies, want to look elsewhere. The really interesting thing, though, the advice that this is very practical advice. I don't know how delighted people will be to hear this, but if you do experience a fraud attack, my advice would be you have a 3 to 6 month window where all arms are wide open. People are really ready to listen to you about budgets you need for new fraud screening tools or fraud blocking methodologies. In 2 times in my career when I've been at the helm while we've been seriously attacked from a fraud perspective, immediately afterward people are willing to spend money, which is not how it should be. Obviously, we should spend the money up front and avoid the costs, the loss after. But there are practicalities that fraud managers will know that, your chargeback losses will come from hit a different P&L line than the budget to build the fraud screening capability. And when that happens, when there's a misalignment between where the money is lost versus how the money could be saved, that misalignment leads to a lack of investment in fraud. It's not what I would love to give you, Jimmy, is the answer that here's how you get that budget up front so that you don't get those losses. That I think is one of the most challenging things for fraud managers.
And I think you explaining the other side of the coin, quite frankly, from a business point of view, what is the oxygen that's needed?
Yeah.
It's growth, first and foremost. I like your lens of looking at it on the fraud fighting side as well, is when you do put in certain layers, it adds that cost of acquisition, that CAC, right?
Yeah.
As you said, there's a percentage for manual review. You're obviously trying to optimize that, and every tool stack you keep adding in kicks into that. But again, that goes into what you're saying around being smart, using tech for what it's used for, automation, etc. And it's that fine tuning can be the lifeblood, especially for like razor sharp businesses like transfer businesses.
Yeah, I think money remittance in particular, and this in general for the industry, that is becoming an incredibly tight margin game. So you've got the history of the industry is, for years, legacy banks taking bloody ages to send you money around the world and charging you, 12 to 20 pounds for the transaction. And you've now got, real challengers in the remittance space who are sending those transactions for pence. And they're sending them in real time. Yeah. And what they're trying to do is a combination of make those margins, but also there's an FX piece which your bank don't want you to know about as well. And if they can play in that space too, there's an opportunity there. But yeah, from a fraud screening perspective, I would say as well for fraud managers, it's something that I think is brought up by what you just said, which is it's really interesting when you see the type of people who get into fraud management as well. So I've kind of come from a more commercial side into the fraud screening space. A lot of people come directly and immediately in from fraud screening, and they're data analysts, and the attitude can sometimes be, well, but the correct thing is to just block all the fraud. So can we not just block all the fraud? And they can sometimes forget why the business is in place. Understandably, because that's why you hire subject matter experts, because they're passionate in their space. But sometimes that passion can come across as like a blinkered view, where it's just the only thing we should care about is fraud screening. And it's not the case. Like if we go back to the analogy of the 100 people getting into the football ground, the purpose is not you want to catch that one guy, but the reason the football ground exists is to get the 99 people into the ground. And I think sometimes business cases in fraud can forget that element, can forget that there's a commercial piece behind this as well. So what can be really successful and powerful can be to focus on false negative identification, where you can make a business case for fraud which says, look, we're going to integrate with X or Y partner, and that is going to give us such shit hot fraud detection that actually I don't need to block 20% of the transactions that were going from a Nigerian card, which was being used in Brussels without 3D Secure switched on by, without 3D Secure liability shift, whatever it might be. That sounds like a risky transaction. However, we can now get some kind of risk score on other elements of the transaction which were unavailable to us, where actually that's not a risky transaction at all. And that's new revenue, and that's revenue we would have missed out on without this tool. So I think business cases in fraud can benefit most from having one eye on the commercial concerns of the company. But a business case in fraud that only focus on, I'm going to block the shit out of all of these transactions, can struggle to gain traction, I think.
That's beautiful. False negative focus instead. So the revenue opportunity, and it's like, we're probably turning away that stuff as well. Like, so that's a really good focus. I want to change focus as well, back into just pre-WorldRemit as well. Like, you're kind of sharing some crazy experience from the 3 days. But as in, I find that fascinating. Like in terms of the, in physical fraud, what you saw as well.
Yeah. So I think in the telco space, it's less of an issue now, but there was a period where, and it's occurring elsewhere, where a decent modus operandi for a fraudster would be to get a group of 10 or 15, 16 to 17-year-old, generally boys. One of them would walk into the shop, a minute or less before what was about to take place would take place. They would advise the staff you need to clear this place now because we are going to hit your shop. And within that very short period of time, the group would run in and just pull the place apart and pull phones, out of stands, pull whole stands away, and then a van would pull up, and all of the contents of the store would be pushed into the van. The boys would then run off. The business model is you just pay each of them 50 quid for doing what they do. Everything they pull into their hand, they would focus on devices £900 and over. And that was a business model, and which is crazy. And members of the public and staff were injured during this. So when you move into the physical space, there is that extra risk as well. But the model remains the same. You have a business, you open up for business. There's an inherent risk in what you do. Somebody identifies that risk, they hit you, and then you learn. So actually, stands that now can't be pulled out of the ground are now in place and no longer just on wheels. Kind of high-end devices not shown at the front of the store, or sometimes not accessed at all. And tethering for them would require, in order to remove them from their tethers, you're actually going to damage the phone so much that it's no longer serviceable. So it's that you have an opportunity, you get hit, you optimize, and then unfortunately those people don't go away. They'll just go to the next place where people haven't optimized in that space, and they will unfortunately get hit. And definitely in e-com, I mean, with the explosion in e-com post-COVID, I've spoken to several businesses who are learning this hard lesson, very painfully and very quickly, and are learning that they need to partner with technology companies in fraud who understand the space, who can build them heuristic rule sets really quickly, who can, fundamentally defend them from fraud. Been really interesting as well, again, without getting into specifics, but talking to some companies whose businesses have exploded during COVID in e-com. They get hit on fraud. And there are still some businesses making the decision to build their own full heuristic fraud tool sets themselves. And they're into waterfall, 18-month projects because they're realizing the complexity of what they need to build is enormous. So COVID has led to some big revenues for fraudsters, and B, some understandable but kind of, if you step back, some odd decisions from e-commerce merchants as well. I get it; it would be cool to build it yourself, but I'll get on the soapbox in a bit, but it goes back to thinking about what is the purpose of your business. You didn't get into this space to become a fraud screening company. You didn't get into this space to become a de facto payments gateway. Other people are doing orchestration and fraud analytics better than you could in 2 years' time. So, I admire the hell out of people who want to build it themselves. I just question whether it's pride a little bit that makes them think, well, we've got great developers, they can build anything.
Especially with a lot of fintech, right? It's the heart of
100%.
Yeah, we're dev. We can build product. That's what we do. And by the way, as we all know, capital climates are in a different place now, and there's no lack of resources to do so. But like you said, it's whether you want an 18-month release cycle on something.
It's particularly in fintech, this hubris, in the gambling space, when I worked at Paddy Power and Betfair, very quickly there was an understanding that we need to partner with the extant fraud screening partners at that time. Let's partner with these guys and use their rule sets. We'll optimize them. We'll have a significant team, but still as light touch as possible, performing manual reviews, etc. But in fintech, there does seem to be somewhat of an attitude of, well, of course we can just build this ourselves. We built everything else, so we'll build this as well, which is, an interesting way to go.
I love the takeaway for me of, over the last 2 years with the pandemic, kind of related to kind of your last story around folk smashing, grabbing within the kind of telco industry, that 3-1, and how people respond. Your takeaway was, it doesn't disappear. Of course it doesn't disappear. They just move on to the next available opportunity. And there's a million opportunities out there, right? There's a million of them, especially with, all these businesses jumping online in the last couple of years, and fraudsters recognizing that. That's kind of the thing we've seen. Is the sad reality is fraud is on the rise at unprecedented levels, because there's that perfect conflux of businesses that are going on because they had to survive even, and yet fraudsters knew this, and that's undoubtedly where they're spending that time and effort just now, is on the easy wins there.
My feeling from, and this is not quantified, so I'll caveat it with that is just, my feeling is that there aren't enough fraudsters for the number of opportunities right now. There is so much opportunity from, which is again, I think I'm a pessimist, but I really, the opportunities from fraud, whenever I'm online and I'm purchasing something from a store, I will just think what was the 3D secure flow there? They seem to think that ABS is super important and it works really well. That's interesting. And the more stores that I see who do this, or kind of, stand up, you can stand up a Stripe integration or a Shopify integration, in a couple of hours, really, and start selling stuff online. I'm seeing a lot of stores who seem to just have exactly done that. And I think, if fraudsters were to cast their eye upon this, the exposure is 100% of all of those transactions. Because they haven't done the fundamentals. It's understandable they haven't. They've got a product, people want to buy it, it's exciting. They can, at the start, you're making crazy margins per transaction, but the risk then is a fraudster comes in, and at a certain size for companies, fraudsters have the opportunity to completely invalidate a business model, which is scary.
You were saying to myself as well, ahead of going live, around your colleague and giving some advice to, they were in general project management now, and they were going to you for, hey Steve, where can I pick up your 15 years of like payments understanding or interchange, what ABS is, what, how 3D secure works, what are even fraud technologies, etc. And you were saying, she was asking, okay, where's the book I can kind of read this, right?
So this was when I was at Spotify, and it's not. I don't think that's an embarrassing question. That's an entirely reasonable question.
Logical.
Completely. I mean, it was a product manager who was. I was explaining to her about whether it was acquiring banks or gateways or 3D security, and the list goes on, right? And she was kind of like, Steve, where's the fucking book? I need to be able to read this. And there at the moment, I think I think in the medium to long term as well, my prediction will be that for learning the payment space and learning about kind of fraud screening and what works and what doesn't, why. There is no way to short circuit it. You have to leverage a community. You have to almost learn it by osmosis over time. So you go to a talk from somebody about device identification or about geotagging or about distributed data points that you can just pick up across the web on transactions. And then after that, you kind of talk to the person and you say, well, this is my pain point. This is why I'm at this conference. I've been hit, on this type of fraud. You get their suggestion, which leads you to another conversation. And I'll bang on about it, but the Merchant Risk Council, in particular, has been career changing for me. Like I'm not blowing smoke up its collective arse to say like. Meeting those people and learning about the payment space and having those connections and just being able to, if a problem occurs, being able to, go into LinkedIn or go into my address book and go, I know a guy who can help with that. Like I know a guy who's seen this type of fraud before, or I know a woman who, leads a team. I need to stand up a team in Manila who are going to do fraud screening. Oh, this company did that. I know that. I can ask her how that went for her. Maybe, what's a fair unit price per hour or whatever. So building a community and building a real network in payments and fraud is game changing for your career.
Yeah, massive. You said the phrase earlier that it can hockey stick up your knowledge, right? Yeah. And I was just reflecting just as you were saying that, and I imagine it's actually down to the intrinsic nature of the problem that's ever evolving. So by the time that nice tune gets published, it presumably is out of date from tactics and 100%. Exploits used. So that's part of the issue. So what's the next best thing? It's probably putting people with brains together where they're able to converse, empathize, and talk tactical, quite frankly. Stuff like community is mega for that, right? The fraudsters use it, certainly. They're on Telegram groups. It doesn't matter if they're attacking an airline or attacking a transfer business or a digital streaming music service. It doesn't really matter.
Completely. I mean, the network effect works in both ways. I've had members of my team, and part of their job was just to troll Facebook groups around our particular companies. You can send. There's this sending code, and if you use this code 3 times, and you can actually get X money out. So you learn about holes in your own product through kind of looking over the fence at those frauds as well. But that network effect occurs on both sides, and it's really, really powerful. There is that nice feeling when you are like looking over the fence at a group of fraudsters chatting about how they're going to hit your site, and you fix the problem while watching it. That is a really pleasant feeling when that occurs. It's getting more challenging. You mentioned like use of Telegram. There's when you can find a Facebook group and it's a bunch of people just talking about how they're going to attack your site. That's excellent. But more and more, it's on the dark web. You can see the start of a chat, and then someone goes, "Okay, DM me now for the details," and you lose all the content. So, I mean, more and more. From an emergent fraud perspective, you're relying on your network to tell you, X or Y is happening, has happened to us, and we've been hit, and you can avoid this. The telco industry does that particularly well from a fraud perspective. There is a really tight network of fraud managers who discuss their businesses really openly in the space. The online gambling community as well do that too. I think, both in terms of fraud, but also responsible gambling. Those companies have to be talking to each other about, here's a list of people who self-excluded. We need to share all that as well. So, but there are industries where that sharing unfortunately doesn't occur because, I think people can incorrectly see that information as some kind of competitive advantage. And it isn't. I totally get that everything can be seen as a competitive advantage. But on the other side, it's only a competitive advantage in fraud if you A, want your fraud blocked, and B, wish it upon your competitor. And I would not subscribe to that kind of idea. I think we should all be sharing as much knowledge as possible on fraud. And then probably the fraud moves to a different industry. It never goes away. It's water flowing downhill. And if it hits hard rock, it'll go around it. And the idea will be, let's all have hard rock. Let's all have fraud protection such that you can even think of it from a self-interested perspective, because you can say, if we can get these guys to fuck off and leave our industry alone, or not see our industry as so open to fraud, it benefits all of us, and therefore it benefits us in particular at X company. I do. There are things which give companies a real competitive advantage, and they're your own proprietary. It's your shit. You should be protective of that. I don't think fraud knowledge fits in that space. I kind of want to. My idea would be everyone needs to share that as much as possible.
Steve, this has been a fascinating chat. As you know, we're known as the Cat and Mouse podcast. So our audience is always super curious to our guests. In the world of fraud fighter versus, say, professional fraudster, who is the cat? Who's the mouse, in your opinion?
I think, based on what we've said, it's probably no surprise I'm going to say I've been both. I've had that superior feeling of watching someone in a almost in a not realizing they're in a sandbox environment, but I'm watching every fraudulent thing they're attempting to do, especially in gambling, where you've got asynchronous movement of money, right? So you've got money coming in, and then you've got play, and then you've got money going out if they win. And during that period, you can feel from a fraud perspective, I know you're a fraudster. I'm just going to watch what you do on my site and learn. And that's the kind of cat feeling of I'm in control here. I'm backing you back and forth. This is fun. Those 4 a.m. Fraud attacks where I don't know what's coming. I can't get data. I can't get a data engineer up. Money is going out the door. I can't switch off the website because otherwise everything's affected. I've definitely been the mouse as well. So unfortunately, I know you probably want a definite decision. I think the idea is the intention should be to have more of those cat days than mouse days. And I think, if those mouse days are rare, you're probably doing pretty well.
Amazing, Steve. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been fascinating.
Really enjoyed it. Cheers, Jimmy.